Gerard Miles, co-CEO of Mission One. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Mishka. Thanks so much for having us back.
Of course. And Mission One, for those who don't know, is a leading executive headhunting company focusing on talent in games and interactive media. Is that a correct way to summarize?
Yeah, Mishka, thanks so much. That's a great summary.
Okay. Well, you've been before on the podcast. We talked about how to get into the C-suite. There was a lot of fan questions, or not fan questions, but like pre-seeded questions. We also have a lot of pre-seeded questions, and I was thinking that we would divide this podcast into two segments. On the first segment, we will focus on giving advice for the candidates, and on the second part of the podcast, we will focus on giving the advice to board of the company or C-suite of the company who are making the hire. How does that sound, Gerard?
Sounds perfect, Mishka. Thank you.
All right. Well, then let's start off with the toughest question of them all. What does an executive headhunter do? And let's put it into a context of what did you do yesterday? Like, what was your day
What
yesterday?
did I do yesterday? Goodness.
Yeah.
If I can
Work-wise.
remember a whole 24 hours ago. Yeah. So at the highest level, executive search is around helping companies go out and hire the very best talent for those really critical roles. And, it's quite a multifaceted task because for every company, the challenge is slightly different, both in terms of the challenge that they're trying to solve with that hire, but also in terms of the challenge of going and recruiting the right person. So it might be you're a 10-person startup, and therefore, your brand is something you're going to have to overcome. The message to the market is a challenge you're going to have to overcome. If you're Scopely, one of our clients, for example, the brand, everyone has heard of a little known game called Monopoly Go, right? So, you've got a very different challenge there. Exactly. So you've got a very different challenge there of, there it's about finding someone who can work at the right scale. And okay, there's very few games that have operated at, say, the scale of where Scopely are now. So headhunters are very much in the middle of that process, trying to both make the right connections to the right candidates, but also actually a lot of the work is in education or in advice to the client. And through a process of meeting people, of seeing different profiles, one often actually refines both what one's looking for and better grapples with the challenges that you're facing and overcoming in attracting that top talent, which is both relevant for today's search and the immediate needs, but also filters into the broader sense of, okay, where are we in the market? How are we growing? What kind of leadership do we need in this team? Particularly now, I've seen a couple of leaders interact with my team, and that also unlocks different ideas of, okay, well, what really works for us. So as a headhunter, I think a lot of people think about the functional, connecting person A to company B, but actually it's a much broader trench, and it's a bit more of a journey, I think, that people go on in executive search. That sounds a little bit prosaic. It's not The Hobbit.
Yeah.
So
Vision statement.
let's granularize it down. Let's take the mystery off to what did I do yesterday? So we kicked up. We had the
calls,
yeah,
probably
exactly. So we actually had the first update call with a client who had been listening to the Deconstructor of Fun podcast. They said, "Oh, Gerard, actually, I was listening, and I didn't realize it was you on that." So with Brian Ward, who we had on a few weeks ago. So. And there was, presenting the first slate of candidates. They hadn't seen anyone. They're a relatively small mobile game development studio looking for a really critical product hire for their organization. So again, we're doing an international search across North America, across Europe, and both explaining a little bit about, okay, what's the market reception been to this role? Here are some initial profiles. Look, we're not saying they're necessarily perfect in every respect, but we think they're really strong across the board for different reasons, and sort of guiding them through that. And then actually as well, I think, a lot of it is we're also in our own world, right? Thinking about a lot of strategy and hiring for ourselves. So that's a little bit of the job, of course, which people forget, right? We're all building businesses ourselves and running them on our side. And then it's a lot of, it's talking to candidates, a lot of updates, a lot of, for example, one was responding to some emails about an angel syndicate coming out of Turkey investing in games, a new one, which was really interesting, right? So again, that's not necessarily like immediately accretive to the search, but actually it's part of that longer term being a part of the network. Another one was connecting someone who's made 20 angel investments to a seed venture, a seed fund. And again, thinking about, okay, well, they've got all these portfolio companies. Maybe they need to know this seed fund, because when they start raising larger checks for their angel companies or pre-seed companies going to seed. So there's a lot of that going on as well, which, on top of meeting candidates, assessing them, writing emails to clients, etc.
So just a lot of calls and making connections. That's basically what executive headhunters do. And something that you talked about last episode is there's also that follow up with people who might not be, with executives who might not be looking for a job when you last talked to them, but then every 6 months you kind of give the call. Hey, how's it going? What's happening? You kind of reconnect, and they might say, hey, it's, projects are going really well. I might be interested in something in about a year. And then you set up, oh, let's talk in 6 months again. And that way you keep tabs to potential candidates that are coming up the line.
Yeah, the lead time on placing a great candidate in a role can be sometimes 2-3 years, right, of relationship building. Yeah. And so much is around that timing magic, because making these really top hires is tricky. And it requires a sort of a magic of timing, opportunity, life circumstances, personal ambitions. Sometimes it's the kids leaving to go to university. That's the catalyst that makes something, okay, I'm going to uproot from Seattle and I'll go to London for a couple of years of fun. So there's a lot of that. And I think this is again, sort of headhunting. I think it looks on paper quite easy. A lot of people think, sometimes you're doing the job, think, why is this so hard, right? But there's actually a lot of stuff that's really difficult. And this is why it sometimes takes years of these relationship buildings to have the right portfolio of candidates, or know when is the right time to make that call to attract some of that superstar quality talent to a team.
Yeah, the way I see it is almost like mini M&A, meaning that with M&A, you're boiling the ocean. You're trying to understand what's happening. You're talking to everybody. You're setting up a relationship with somebody who might be ready for an acquisition or ready for a sale, and then that sale might actually happen in a year, 2, 3, and then just like with M&A, the most difficult part is the post-acquisition integration. So making that deal work, as we've seen, like in M&A overall, it's between 70 to 90% of deals fail to deliver value. I would assume that with executive hires, it could be, I don't know what the percentage is, but it is also difficult to bring a leader into an existing company and make that leader work and deliver value in a totally new setting with a totally new set of people, etc. So would that be a correct assumption?
It's certainly a challenge you need to think very deeply about. And I suppose obviously a difference between M&A, right? In M&A, you might be dealing with an organization of several thousand people, right? And the pivot speed of that, or the ability to understand that, right, is extremely complex, right? That's why you have investment bankers spending thousands of hours going through the weeds of everything and
charging for thousands.
Yeah, well, exactly. So I mean, with executive hires, there's a simplicity there of you're dealing with one person and the organization, and you can do a lot, and you should do a lot to mitigate that risk. Some things, for example, which I think some clients do, but more could be doing, is around the referencing, and not just about referencing in terms of, did this person steal the silver spoons at their last place, or the sort of the very base check round of was this person who they say they are, and did they do a good job, which I think a lot of people focus on the functional side. We really encourage our clients to see the referencing as the start of the onboarding. So mitigate your risk by really understanding who that person is, what is the kind of environment they're going to thrive in, because it's different for everyone. And so that classic sort of forewarned is forearmed, and you can see, because when the magic is right, there's huge value that is created. Now, yes. Again, sometimes it doesn't work out, and again, there's a lot of volatility in an organization, right? Where the company looks like in a year or 18 months' time might be a very different company, and therefore, things cannot work out for just reasons out of everyone's control. But we see a lot of executives going for sort of 3-4 year stints, going on to deliver exits. We just had somebody we placed earlier this year as part of a Series A company. We put them as a CFO. They've just raised 17 million euros. The lady we put in there, she's absolutely world class CFO, and she's gone in there and added value and helped in their next stage of the journey. So those are the kind of stories that we love to hear. And actually, again, you do have that massive multiplier there. So Michail, the easy question would say that we add a lot more value than investment bankers, really, because actually I think we get a higher hit rate of executives adding value than probably M&A deals doing that.
Well, okay.
Posting comments from the investment bankers listening in, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, they do charge way more, so it's whoever wins at the end.
Step into the future of game monetization with Xsolla, the premier partner for game developers seeking to expand their reach and revenue. Xsolla provides a robust suite of tools designed to enhance user acquisition, manage subscriptions, and streamline payment solutions worldwide. Unlock new markets and maximize profitability through their customized, secure payment architecture and dedicated support team. Xsolla, powering game developers to achieve global success.
Well, let's talk about what's the best way to get into the C-suite. And let's start off with definition. What is a C-suite, Gerard?
So the C-suite, obviously the chief suite, as chief executive officers, chief operating officers, etc., are within that. I think so. When there's a number of facets to this question. So first of all, if you're in an IC role or you're in a manager role listening to this, and you're thinking, okay, how do I get up the chain? I think it is helpful to think of it as a bit of a pyramid of skills, right? And as you move up in terms of seniority, you have more breadth of responsibility across the organization. And to mirror that to yourselves, then, if you want to go up there, you have to grow broader yourself to move up those rungs. And classically, obviously, most of us start in an individual contributor role, that IC level. To move up in that is a lot of focus on craft and a lot of rewards for how good you are at doing that functionality of that job. And then we have sort of vision often of the more manager level, which is about more leadership, how you're organizing the team, how you're motivating them around a set of objectives and getting them going. So sort of moving and developing those skills to move up to that more manager to director level. And then once we start getting to really the vice president and the C-suite, it's very similar. I think often in organizations that the kind of qualities you're looking for, that becomes more about strategic direction and initiative and broader vision setting across the organization. And I think the shift from the execution of the plan and some sort of autonomy with that to really setting the vision for the function and having a much broader context of what that means and really a sort of a really understanding the vision of the company. I think it requires a sort of a selflessness or some sort of ability to really understand the bigger picture rather than simply like, these are my objectives, I'm doing a good job, like this is good for me and my team. To really understand and take a step back and say, well, okay, but for the company, we're not going in the right direction. And it might be in a different function. It might be a function that's a stakeholder to me, but I'm going to be the person who steps up and wrestles with that, understands that, is because that pivotally is successful for the company's vision of where we're trying to go, and we're all in this same boat, and proactively just chase after the most important things consistently and set that prioritization is, I think, a key part of that C-level executive qualities that you're looking for. And as a bit of a warning, I might say to people, because I think this can be a common thing, that again, perhaps you're sat there as a director thinking like, I could do that, right? Like they don't seem to do that much, or like, I'm so ready for this next level of role. And I don't understand maybe why I'm not getting it. And again, we see that sometimes with, again, people aren't, sort of sometimes struggling with that sort of like, well, I feel like I'm ready for the step up, or, of course I'm at that level already. And, I probably should have been there already. I would say that sometimes
sounds like a man thinking about the role.
Well, I think there can just be a level of, if you're thinking that, probably actually, like every role you get into, once you're doing the role, it's more tricky than it looks from the outside, right? And I think we've all been that sort of, I remember thinking once I'm partner, my old firm, like, it's all going to be easy, but it's not easy, right? There's just other challenges, and actually all those important meetings you think you're missing out on, you then attend them, and they are deathly dull, and they're going around in circles, and you think, gosh, I just wish I could go back and do my day job here, because we've spent 2 hours achieving nothing here. No, I'm hyperbolic, but it can be like that, and I think people will be laughing, I hope who recognize some of that. So but I was going to say that perception of like it gets easier, or like I could do what they could do, if you think that, it might be more a sign actually that you're not ready, right? And I think actually I think we see that from hiring managers who are actually kind of suspicious of somebody who maybe doesn't get if you don't understand where the gaps are, the sort of the fear that they don't know what they don't know, right, as a candidate is very high, and it's quite hard to perceive that from your own viewpoint if you are that person who's trying to move up, because you keep running into this wall of thinking, like, I've got all that, I can do this job. And it's, I would encourage people to go back to talking about growth or breadth, right? Think about all the things you don't have, right? And being really curious about that and acknowledging that, and then working on, okay, now I don't have this, but actually what would be a really good answer to show that I am thinking like that, or I could go out and find those examples of, okay, well, this is what we were asked to do, but actually I just didn't think it was important. So I got on the call with the CEO. I convinced them of this, and my boss, the CMO and the CEO, or whoever it is, right? And I said, look, I think this is the wrong strategy. And then that turned into something else. And then we got that going, and I got support. Those kind of stories would really make somebody sit up, I think, and go, wow, okay, this person is not just good at their job, which everyone applying for the job is going to be good at their job, right? But to really sort of stand out as a spike of the few percentile of people who move up to that level.
Yeah, I can give an example. It was quite frustrating for me because I did not understand in the beginning when I was in a certain company, sitting in a management team meetings, and the C-suiter, when we were discussing, we're often saying, yeah, but that's a tactical point. We need to think strategically. And I was like, what do you even mean? Like, it was hard to grasp what is strategic and what is tactical. And it took quite a while, a time of zooming out, seeing the market as a whole, even broader than the market, and understanding like what are the broad lines, kind of getting on the same context level with the C-suite, and then making suggestions through that aspect. And I think like, because people would be like, well, how do I concretely get into that position? How can I concretely make the right suggestions and formulate right ideas from my vantage point? And the thing is, you need to change your vantage point in order to be aligned with the executive team or with the C-suite, to then kind of speak the same language and see the same challenges. But yeah, like
I think
that's
Mishka, if I could say that is such a great example though of not understanding even what strategy is, right? And I think most of us do not understand it. No, I don't think you're alone, right? We're not taught about it in our education system. Nobody sits you down and sort of says like, this is what strategy is, and this is what it means. You get taught how to do economics or maths or whatever it is, right? How to write a good essay. But very few education systems that I'm aware of, at least, really sit you down and sort of say like, well, okay, like this is how you could do something good, but over a period of 4 or 5 years, like there's, a company's got a better strategy or a smarter player that's playing into what the market wants. It's going to just find it easier and do better than the company that's working very hard, but on a poor strategy. And there is, and I think, again, for people listening to this, again, who are mentors themselves, I'd really encourage that, because I think once I understood it myself, I was kind of quite keen to get my team to understand it. And it can be, again, I think some managers are thinking, well, it's not in their day-to-day job, right? But again, strategically, if you want to grow people through your organization, giving them that awareness is really helpful, because again, sometimes just awareness. And again, I mean, some top level C leaders, and they're always so good about that. The sort of the communication to the team, right? Even if it's a tough message, if it's an honest one, and you're saying like, this is the direction we're on, it means some hard challenges, or it means some sacrifice, or we've all got to work harder for the next 6 months because look, we're in trouble, guys, right? Like to get out of this and, get out of the hole, this is what's going to take. And if you have that respect and honesty with people, you can do wonders and really get them into that. Again, they need to know every detail, but have a sense of, versus, again, I've seen examples where closed box, leadership is terrified of letting anyone know what's going on. and then it falls apart because people are disenfranchised. They don't have the context. They see decisions being made and they get frustrated. So I think strategy is, you could do probably a whole, not just podcast, a whole podcast series on strategy, and what it means and how to dive into it. But I think that's a really good point, Mishka.
Yeah. That's at least been my experience. And also the content on Deconstructive Fun is now balanced quite well between strategic content and tactical content. Tactical content being what I initially thought that was most important: deconstructions of different games, some market channels that are popping up, and like these sort of things that can improve your products, your profitability, your revenue on a short term. And then strategic is zooming out, looking at the market as a whole, finding growth pockets, finding different trends that might be affecting different elements, even looking outside of the gaming, understanding why certain things are happening, and then diving deeper and creating strategies around how to operate in a changing environment and take advantage rather than being taken advantage of. So that's in short, but let's kind of move into like more tactical stuff. Let's say, because strategically, in order to be a C-suiter, you need to be strategic. That's a really easy summary, and then have that strategic mindset. But when it comes to recruitment of C's into this chief positions, how important it is to write insightful stuff on LinkedIn and attend podcasts to show your face and build your brand. So a lot of these are derived from the community, these questions.
Yeah.
But I'm going to clean them up a little.
Kick-ass live ops need kick-ass tools. That's where Heroic Labs comes in. They just released a massive update to their Satori live ops platform. And having done my research, I can say with confidence that it's second to none. In a single product, you get everything you need, including event capture, player segmentation, feature flags, remote configuration, A/B testing, experimentation, live events calendar, messaging, retention graphing, analytics, and so much more. If you're serious about running live services in a game, get serious about the tools you use. Connect with Heroic Labs and make some serious cheese with your live ops.
So how important is brand building? So there's different levels of that, right? So I'd say it is really important to build brand, but I don't mean it in the context of necessarily being on LinkedIn or there's sort of, you don't have to be an influencer. I think that's what I would say. So, brand is, and so when we're doing executive level roles, we often have a set of assessment criteria. So it'll be 4 or 5 different criteria that we're marking a candidate against and giving them some sort of score against, and that's a comparator score against other candidates in the process. One of those will nearly always be what we call track record, which is this sort of broad category which covers both, how long have you been at organizations? What did you achieve there? What were the people you grew while you were there? What was their impact? Did they then go on to get promoted and go elsewhere and do a good job? What do people say about you in the market? If we're to reference you, if we can name drop, somebody like Chris Petrick, for example, who you were on a panel with recently, right? He is someone who...
Who's that? I'm just kidding.
So,
and also Petrovich.
Exactly. So so for those who don't know, he's the chief business officer at FunPlus. He's a very senior executive at Zynga before that. So his reputation is phenomenal, right? Like people know about it, and people, you're smiling there, right? Like, and it's not because he does these conferences or whatever, right? Like he was somebody who is well known, right? And he's got this great track record, and he's somebody that people are. Oh wow, So and there are lots of examples of that, but I just sort of picked him up because I saw Mishka. You'd done a conference with him recently, so there was a name.
He's my Batman. Whenever I need a C-suiter for a panel, I just fly in the Petrovich brand on the wall, and he flies in and saves the day.
Yeah. So, but again, like he's got great insights, and again, I could pick your Chris, but there's many people you'd say, but it's not because the sort of the brand piece at the end or the public bit is after the fact that he's already got this really wide reputation, and there's good people again on the investors. I could name drop people, but then other people get offended. Like, why didn't you name drop me? But I was just thinking of so brand is really important. It's a really small world, and I've been at conference. There's so many conferences, and Mishka, I'm sure you've been at these, where you're at a conference and somebody says like, "Oh, do you know X?" And I'm like, "Yeah, they're all right," or like, "Yeah, they're good," And there's a lot of that going on, a huge amount, and it's almost like your subconscious. You don't know what's going on in your subconscious. You also don't really know how who's talking about you in the market, what they're saying, and actually, I think again. I've got so many clients, chief executives. You say like, oh, you present a candidate. They're like, oh, I know the CEO. I'm texting them now. You have to say, stop that. So you can't, because they haven't even told their boss they're leaving, right? But there's, the connectivity there. And again, you've got to remember, a lot of CEOs, they spend all their time like just connecting and being aware of the market. They're very often very outward focused, and also they hang out with other, founders and all the rest. So they are going to be able to reference you and your brand there. So I think it's sort of just perhaps it's kind of fundamentals, right? I'd say focus on those of having those really good runs where you were at somewhere for 3 to 5 years. If it's 2 years, I'll be honest, like if you have too many 2-year stints in your career, people are going to be looking at that and saying, but what did they do, right? What did they do? And I don't want to demoralize anyone who's got a lot of those stints on their career, because there are life circumstances, things happen, and all of that. But actually, if you're really thinking, okay, if you're finding a blocker to go get that next level role, I would say to you, have that sort of 3 to 5 year career, really invest in people in your team, not just yourself, that you could say, well, hey, these are my advocates. These are the people I grew. Invest in those relationships. As I said, being strategic, being that player who's thinking about more broadly about the challenge, so that when they call up your boss one day and say, like, what were they like? They go, wow, they just made my life so much easier, right? And again, those are the things that again are hard to do in the moment, but actually over a period of time are your personal brand. I think those are important. In terms of LinkedIn profile and all the rest, I don't. I mean, it's important if you're trying to do business development or something like that. If you've got a particular angle to go do it. One caveat: there are certain roles that will be looking for more of a public profile for those positions. So, for example, you might have a chief technology officer. They say, like, we need someone to send them to the conferences, right? So all these sort of tech. So it helps our hiring of engineers, right? It raises our brand profile. Is comfortable going on the number one podcast in the world, Deconstructor of Fun. Right? They're just comfortable coming on these podcasts or whatever it is and raising the profile. So there are specific jobs. Again, they tend to be at larger organizations where the role is, it's about brand building in some senses. So being comfortable with public speaking or learning how to like build that process could be helpful in those particular cases.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like publishing roles or anything where you need to be building the visibility of the company. But that's a phenomenal advice, and I hope that people who are in mid level of their careers, or like mid, however you put it, like few years into their careers, understand this, that spending longer stints, something that I wish I would have heard much earlier, is super beneficial. And even though it gets hard, or even though not hard, but even though it's like there's changes in the organization, or even if you receive a very interesting offers from other organizations, just focus on building what you have and gathering those 3 to 5 year projects with a clear outcome before moving on to the next challenge. Would that be the way?
And I think, and also, and it is hard to do from foresight or have the foresight, but when you're thinking about taking a role, think really deeply, right? Because again, if you're sort of a bit, I don't know, like if this is where I want to be, right? And you think, I'll do it for a year and a half, 2 years, and then it was move on, right? Like, and it's very hard to know that. But, and again, people have life circumstances, they need jobs, all the rest. So if you can, though, really think very deeply and be quite picky about the right opportunity for you. I mean, again, you're going to do better in that role, right, and be happier personally, but you're more likely to go build that. And if there are, I think sometimes people aren't picky enough about the roles they're taking, or they're looking at the wrong criteria. They're looking at salary, right, or they're looking at like size of team management. And
Yeah.
again, I think it's easy to sort of say on a podcast, but in reality, when you're actually looking at roles, you do sort of go like, well, that one's paying more, right? Or like, oh, that was a bigger team and I want to get management experience. But actually those are very much secondary criteria. If you really want to go and build your career over longer term and invest in yourself, go join that CEO who you think is absolutely stellar, right? Whatever the company looks like almost, right? Go join that team that you thought, wow, they seem switched on. They're really driving things because they will have a good reputation in the market. Even if it's not successful, if they are like top quality people, they'll be like, oh, you worked with them. Like, you must be tough, right? You must be good. Versus you go to a bigger brand or whatever, but is a bit sluggish or whatever. If you go take the paycheck, whatever, then that's, again, no judgment on any choices. But I think sometimes people may not be aware of the decisions they're making that affect that longer term brand in the moment.
Yeah. So being strategic about where you work in a longer term and building your career throughout the longer term, I would say like personally, my advice from my mistakes is to have somebody who's mentoring you, because oftentimes being reflective and understanding the long term impetus with all the choices that you have, etc. You know, few of us can do that, and that's why you have mentors. That's why you have other people who would sit down with you, like, okay, let's walk this through. Let's see what situation this could lead to. I know I've done this with other people, and by the way, funniest thing is, even though I have a lot of short, like those 2-year positions, I always advise others not to leave, not to leave, and like continue, like just be there. It's fine. I know this is like usually it's around management changes and the people changes. There's a new boss that is coming in, and that's when that usually causes a lot of directors and up to consider other positions. I'm like, just be there for a year. Look, it's a great brand. You're getting a great salary. Just focus on your team. Like exactly the things that you were saying. And so having a mentor who's more looking after you throughout the long term would be very beneficial and allow you to make those strategic decisions rather than being reactive to what's happening.
Michigan, actually, there's a point I wanted to raise on this podcast. What's the importance of mentorship, actually, and finding good mentors can really accelerate you in your career and professional development. And even if it, again, either can be an informal mentor, I would also recommend people, particularly when they're getting to that director, VP level, to invest in a professional mentor if it's a paid relationship as well. Go and do it, because you can, better returns than putting on market in the stock market, right? Or investing in early stage companies, right? If you invest in yourself and they provide 2-3 insights that unlock something for you, I mean, you reap the personal benefit of not struggling, right? We all struggle with things of like, why isn't this going easier? Or why am I? If somebody can unlock that for you, it's gives you personal benefit of satisfaction, but also professionally, it can really force you. I give one example. Actually, I had a client who the relationship was going very poorly with, very, very poorly with, and I thought it was
your relationship with that
with
person.
The client. Yeah, we had and it was
okay, got it.
It was the only one of that year, and I was confused, and I was like, well, I think it's them, right? I think they're just difficult people, and
it's not me, it's you.
And I had a mentor, and they sat me down. They went through it, and they sort of showed me that actually it really was I had been winding them up in various ways, unintentionally, but like through my own behaviors and my own sort of wanting to help in a certain way, I had been upsetting these people and this client, and that was a really tough lesson for me to absorb. Was to sort of like, oh, it is me, like it actually is me. Like sometimes you think, oh, it's not. It's not, it's other people or whatever, you're taking the blame unfairly. And that was actually, so it was one of the toughest professional growth periods for me. I was really, it was tiring almost sort of going through it, but it really unlocked something for me and came through. And I think, well, now I can handle that kind of client better in the future. And that is worth 10, 20x, whatever I paid in mentorship fees. So it really can pay back hugely.
And okay, and does Mission One provide mentorship connections, or like how does it work?
Yeah, so not as a professional sort of service, as it were, but no, we do a lot of that just informally. So, and I think one question that is helpful is people think about how do you leverage a headhunter, right? And I'd say this for you. I think most people think, okay, when I'm looking for a job, I will call up a headhunter. And that makes sense, right? Like, okay, they might have whatever, or I'll when I'm thinking about certain positions. The breadth of relationship with a headhunter can be and should be general connectivity So like who in the market is interesting to know. A lot of that can be with investors. I know Deconstructor has their own views on the venture capitalist funds and all the rest, but we will, a lot of people who might be thinking down the line, okay, what if I want to raise funding, or the venture capitalists, they've got wide portfolio of areas. So they can be, we can be connecting you into people outside of a direct mandate. So again, that goes back to longer term relationships. There's a running theme of that longer term investment, right? Because it might take 2-3 years for that relationship to pay off, but invest now and reap later. Mentorship is another one, right? Like, who could we connect? And again, I've probably done that more proactively than being asked. I've sometimes sort of said something like, oh, you should meet X and Y, and you guys get on and have good conversations in the market. And then market intel as well can be another just way that you can be leveraging. Now, again, like, people are busy, right, as well, and we're all missing connections and running around the place. So again, so don't be rejected or feel rejected if you're trying to get all this stuff from a headhunter you're talking to, and it's you're thinking like, oh, why aren't they like calling back? It's probably because they're just super busy, and we're all under projects and pressure. But if you do have them on the phone, I think it's a general thing of life. And I'll say this, that one of the earlier questions, what do you have to get to do the C-suite? So I've worked on C-level roles with Riot, with King, most recently with Savvy Games, working C-level roles with those guys. And people often say like, oh, those must be super hard searches, like really difficult. And a truth of that actually is that they're really often like the most lovely, because actually the candidates who have really got to those really top roles, they're low ego and they want to get to know you. They have that ability to make you feel like you're a really important person they're talking to that day. And there's a sort of a breadth of their conversation. They want to build a relationship with you for longer term value. So if you think about, that's how people at the very, very top of the organization are behaving. Sometimes have a reflection of that, because I think sometimes, again, there can be that temptation to be more transactional with people, because we all think we've got to be efficient with our time, right? We live in this culture, particularly so anyone coming from a Protestant country roots, like that sort of like productivity, time efficiency. There can be that real push, and we think we've got to do that to be successful. But actually, at the very top, they are very efficient with their time, but they make it feel like that this is your time, and this is special, because actually that gets the best out of you as a headhunter. You're then ingratiated towards them, right? They're smart in doing this. But I would encourage people to think about that as well, of how you interact with headhunters, and not just seeing it as a transactional, because then you'll become more commoditized to them as well. And that's how the very best people are doing it.
Yeah. So personal relationships matter. Interesting.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Well, but again, I do get to this point of there's so much obvious advice out there that is poorly absorbed, right? That we sort of know, but we don't do. And I see that a lot, actually. And again, particularly at that like director, VP level, again, I think there is a distinction of actually like really mastering some of this simple stuff. Again, I don't think there is any magic bottle of success, and you've got to root through 1,000 books to find it, right? Like, most principles of how to be successful in life, I think, are fairly fundamental, but we don't want to do them well, or we don't understand them well enough to do consistently. And
we just don't. But I would go back to, like, we just don't see it ourselves. Like, we're so in that moment, like you just described, like you did not understand what was the problem, and you thought the client was the problem, not you. And that's why, like, I'll go back to it. Like, my biggest mistake personally is not having consistent mentor throughout the time, because that really helps you to kind of get out of the weeds, out of the day to day, and really look at yourself from a third perspective, and be like, hey, like, this is, it's so simple from somebody else who's not you to tell what you're doing wrong or tell what you're doing right. But when you're there, when you're having these moments, whatever it is in a company, like, there are frustrating periods, whether you have a new boss or so forth, that kind of change everything. And you are thinking in that moment, you're thinking about the next day. You're not thinking about what's happening in a year. So that there's that.
This podcast is brought to you by AppsFlyer. In today's digital world, understanding your app's journey from discovery to download is more than just insightful. It's essential. Enter AppsFlyer, the leader in mobile attribution and marketing analytics that allows you to measure the full potential of your marketing efforts, making every ad dollar work smarter. With AppsFlyer, that's your new reality. Dive deep into data-driven insights that reveal exactly where your users come from and how they interact with your app.
Apps Flyer, where your app's potential meets performance. But I wanted to ask you about something that, well, actually, one simple question. Like, where do you feel like the candidates make most of their mistakes when they're in that executive search process? Is it that transactional approach of not having good relationships set up with the headhunter, or?
I think that is they could be doing that better, but actually I think there's a more obvious mistake that people are making in processes, which again is fundamental and unforgivable when you think about it, which is lack of preparation for interviews. And you look surprised, Mishka, and you should be, right? You're thinking, well, these are people who've got to a certain level in their careers. They should know to prepare. But I see it consistently. They haven't really like downloaded the app. They haven't played the game. They haven't like played it enough to have like deep views on it. And it's such an own goal, because you sometimes saying like, oh, if you've, and again, do it when if you're in a process with a headhunter, do it when you're talking to them. Don't think, that they're a part of the process, right? We're the first gate of this process. So if we're saying like, have you had a chance to play the app? You say, oh, I haven't downloaded it. I'm like, well, we called you up a week ago. Like, where's the curiosity, right? Like, it just shows like lack of curiosity or lack of taking this seriously. And again, I'm not saying you're dead in the water, right? If you've done that and you're suddenly panicking, right? You're not at all. But like there are so many soft signals that you're giving off all the time. Again, like we often think about the big signals of like, well, I did this with the team and it was very successful, therefore like I'm a good person, right? Or whatever, right? The big sort of blocks. But there's so much there around. Talk about culture, right? Or nuances of like just how, if you think about the most successful people you've met or the most impressive people you met, they're doing many subtle things that make what they're saying better, right? Where they're being slightly more concise, bit more prepared, where they look you in the eye more directly, whether they, there's a number of different things that they're just a shade or two more polished about, which elevates them above an experience with other people. And I would really encourage people to do your prep, take it really seriously, because it's a sign to the client. And we hear this a lot from the clients saying like, oh, it's a bit disappointing they hadn't had more chance to look at the product, right? Because they're desperate. If you come in and go like, I had, first of all, be nice about it. Right? Again, like, be nice about the client's product, right? They love it, whatever you think of it, and you might think it needs a lot of changes, but find something, and be honest, but find, appreciate the work that's gone in, and then show you have that passion for like wanting it to get better in some way or other. And then have a real conversation, and that is going to draw them out so much, because you're talking about, it's like talking to somebody about their kids, right? Like, oh yeah, like I am so glad to find somebody else who's really interested in my kids, right? And you're like, oh, I didn't, it's sort of, again, we might do it in social circumstances, whatever, but that is, it's super simple, but I see it so many times, and just it's very easy to go through. The other one about, I think, going into a process from candidates that I would say is be kind about the process. And what I mean about the interview process, because a lot of interview processes, and this is for the client side, are not run particularly well, in my opinion. Right. And again, I don't know. Yeah. I won't name drop, but there's a big company we don't work with, but they're hiring a lot in games, and everyone sort of says about their process, like, oh yeah, like I think I'm quite close to the final round. And then you call them 2 months later, like, I still think I'm quite close to the final round, right? Like, and so, and this is true of really big organizations. It's true of 20 people startups we've worked with. A lot of them have either slow processes if they're bigger. There's a lot of repetition in the questioning. So again, if you're a client listening to this, really think deeply about it, because that's not a great experience for the candidate to have go, I met the fourth person and they asked me the same questions I've already been asked 3 times, right? And it does happen. Again, it happens with big organizations, or it happens with, organizations you think better of. And with particularly smaller ones as well, where it's just, everyone is asking the same stuff. So, but from the candidate side, as much as I'm sort of criticizing the client side there, from the candidate side, have an empathy for that a little bit, and maybe just expect that, these people are not necessarily world specialists in running an internal hiring process, particularly if they're a small organization. It's like the first C-level executive they're hiring, first VP level executive they're hiring. And I just sometimes see people get frustrated, and I can understand it, but I think just, again, a little bit of like, go into it with a sort of a charitable sort of understanding, and go, and even see it as an opportunity to like feedback and say like, hey, like, I really enjoyed the process, but just FYI, like, I want you to like, just purely as a like, hey, I think this would help your candidate experience. Like, I got asked the same question about like my ability to run, you know, a 30-person team, 100-person team, whatever, it's 4 times, and the answer is still the same. So I just wanted to feed that back and just hope that you're getting right, what you need, and right, you know, you getting all that you need from this. If you phrase it like that, then that can change a sort of, oh, a bit grumpy about this, or like, you know, it's not a good sign of professionalism to, you know, again, people aren't necessarily specialists in this, and then they're not always, you know, again, it's part of our job to try and coach the client as well, but it's helpful when the candidate's giving it to us, but then we can, you know, feed it on in a nice way, and that can actually become another part of the process, which can be positive experience for the client, right? Flip that round to like, how am I presenting myself even better through this, rather than I'm going to complain about it or get disengaged or get grumpy about it.
That makes sense. So 2 points that you, just to summarize it, is that don't get frustrated, and it's so easy. I understand, especially with a C-suite hire, because for the company, when they're bringing in a new leader, it's also a big risk for the company. Like, they have to, you know, it might be a cultural hit, it might be this, it might be that, but the second part is that in the interview process, you know, in form of empathy, like, you have to understand that other executives are interviewing you, and so their days are probably pretty busy. In order to get through that whole schedule, it's quite hard. You know, I've worked at some companies where we had one day with a candidate that was quite effective. So every executive would have about 30 to 45 minutes with the person who would be visiting the office, and it would be like a full day for that person. But I understand that that's not always possible, and that can drag on the process.
Yeah, and again, there's a lot there, I think, about, you could go into like, what does it take to run a good process, right? And I think I agree. I think getting people in for a day is fantastic, right? Because it gives a bit more of a concentrated experience of what's it like to work at this company. And, you know, and we're moving on to some of the stuff around like, what would you advise clients, right? And I think you've always got to understand there's two sides to what you're trying to do, which is obviously one side is assess, is this the right person? The other side should be to get this person super, super excited about the role. And I think, you know, I'm sort of putting an emphasis there, because I think a lot of people go like, oh yeah, you've got to like make them, you've got to sell, right? And that's almost like, yeah, you know, I know I've got to do that. Sure. And to a certain extent, like, I really, really encourage anyone listening there, like, ramp that up, because the best candidates, it's like, if you want to go whatever sport you're into, right? It's into football, soccer, whatever. Like, if you want to go get the guy who scored the winning goals in the Champions League final, right? Like, they're going to go enjoy the very best clubs, right? And basically, like, we all want the top talent, and we sort of think like, going into the process, we've got to like assess, are they good enough? Are they good enough, right? Like, but to get all those top people, all the people who are really good enough, they know their market worth. They're going to be highly sought after, and you're only going to get them, or like, you can get an edge by really showing them a lot of love. Like, wow, you know, like, make them feel special and treasured through the process. And I may be going a bit too far, but I think, you know, so many people just like take it like, oh yeah, no, we're going to sell and tell them a great company, and then like, oh, they should get it, right? Like, no. You've got to be, if you really want to get those top people, you got to be wowing them over, right? Like, and it's, you know, and I think, you know, again, with those days of assessment, again, a lot of execs going in are prepped. Okay, here's the 4 things you got to assess, right? Like, as a marketing role, so marketing function, a technical role, whatever, like GM role, like, you know, whatever it is. And they'll go through their list. But instead, they've got busy days, right? They're on to the next thing. They haven't sort of seen the process. They're sort of thinking like, oh, like, they're looking at this hire from like, is this good for me? Right. And I think really sort of communicating that, if you're the board or the CEO of a company, communicating that to those people in the interview process, saying, look, by the way, let's make sure this person goes away feeling like, wow, that was a really like enjoyable, interesting experience. And like, I felt like really interested in, versus like, I felt like I was being drilled for 40 minutes. And like, you know what I mean? And again, I don't know if you've ever had that experience, Michigan, but it can evolve like that.
I've had most craziest experiences. I mean, I've been in the business for 15 years. I had the most ridiculous experiences, and also some of the great ones. So let me not talk about the ridiculous, but let me kind of comp on what you were saying. I'll name 2 companies that in my opinion kind of like seriously influenced the way I think about hiring talent. Scopely and Wooga, like throughout the years, like both of them were very much like, let's get you on site. Let's spend time together inside the office, kind of going through these things, but also outside the office, like having dinner, going out for drinks, and kind of like creating this sort of a feeling of you'd be joining a team, a group of people who you like being with, and that's something that I don't think people think enough. It's like not only the work, and most important part I think are the people that you'd be working with, and if you really create that connection, that personal connection, it's like, oh, these people are awesome. I'd love to be with them. They're so communicative. We had fun inside the office. It was interesting, and then outside the office, they were very personal. Wuga also did this interesting thing, at least back in the days, is that they would invite you to Berlin, and they would also invite your spouse or partner. And because relocation is, well, I think we need to talk about relocation a little bit, but that's a tough challenge for the spouse. And if they are not able to, or if they don't like where they're going, your your likelihood of succeeding in your job and staying for a long time is probably close to zero. And so they would bring the both of you together, and while you were spending some time at the office, they would, kind of tell you all the places where your spouse can go, kind of see the city, enjoy it, imagine how it would be like. They would, kind of encourage you to stay for the weekend. I think that was great because you're making the decision together. It's not only you who's making the decision about the relocation. It's you and your partner that are making the decision. And so when you're there having a weekend in Berlin, maybe sitting on dinner or maybe flying back, what did you think? And they'd be like, yeah, it was a really cool city. I think we should consider this. Like, let's go. So these are kind of like the companies that I would like to highlight is the ones that create that personal connections with the people who interviewed you, who follow back to you saying, hey, it was great meeting you. It was so much fun, maybe outside the office, as well as understanding that the person is not coming often alone, and let's make sure that they are excited to where they're coming from, that their spouses in case of relocation.
Mishka, you've really highlighted again, I think, an area which is actually really important. But again, it highlights how many things there are to think about in an interview process, right? And again, I think we all sort of here zero in on a little bit of like assessing the right people or like the comp package being right, some of those big blockers. But, exactly, if you fly, even class of flight that you're offering someone, again, if this person's really a world-class person or whatever it is, right, you're trying to get into your organization, don't make it a challenge. You don't start being like, again, mostly first class, but, again, if it's a long flight, do business class for them, right? Like, and it is expensive. But again, think about the factor cost of getting the wrong person in the role or not hiring this role 6 months. A lot of these costs are actually tiny in comparison to the opportunity cost or the impact cost. And again, if they go and say, that was easy, that was a great experience, me and my spouse loved this. And like, and they made sure we stayed in the right area and they told us about some local schools, whatever it is, right? It's all these, going back to those soft signals, right? Like they layer on top of each other. And that can actually help you much more than the bigger things you're thinking about. Like, well, there's a lot of risk here because a lot of equity in the role, or okay, whatever it is that your other challenges you're concerned about, why they might not take it because okay, it is a relocate, and that's going to be challenging. Like, if you layer up these many things, both consciously and subconsciously, that candidate is getting more excited about who you are. So I think that's a really, again, it's a niche point, but it's all these little bits you can be putting together to get to that top percentile of hirers or hiring processes.
Yeah. The candidate needs to feel good about, like, you're expecting the candidate to do their homework, to be truly interested, to come prepared, to come up with a plan, to work well with the existing team. You're expecting them to not get frustrated if your process is a little bit on the shorter side. But you also have to, like, you're interviewing a top candidate that you're trying to sell to. Like, this candidate is probably talking to other companies. They don't need to leave the company that they're working with. And so you need to put your first foot forward and kind of make sure that the relationship happens. Because in the end, the way I believe it, it's not that you're going to make the decision because X company pays 10% more or the equity package is, a little bit larger there. You're going to make the decision because you feel great about that.
Yeah.
And at least that's how maybe it's just only me.
One of the best candidates in terms of I've met and placed, was a very senior role. We placed him over at Twitch. I was about to say, I might not be able to finish off the story. Actually, I've realised I might have identified them too much. Actually, okay, I won't say. But I would say I've said in the most broadest of terms. But I've known people who have really made sacrifices from their own situation to go to a company they believed in the trajectory of, right, and were really super excited by that opportunity. That they were, they could have gone and earned more elsewhere, like significantly more elsewhere, or could have, got title larger teams. But at that point in time, again, this was years ago, Twitch is not the company it was. But at that point in time, it was the right decision. And again, you sort of, and that person, as said, was one of the very best candidates I've seen in North America or Europe, and they made that decision based on all those other things that we obviously, you almost think, as a headhunter, I was like, well, you can't get this person because you're not in the right range, right? But because you do everything else right, they're able to see beyond that, and you're able to go and get that sort of world-class talent to your organization that you might, off the box, you'd be like, oh, no, you can't get that person. What are you talking about? But if you run the right process, you can sometimes just find that little bit of way in to get them to say, this is what I want to do, and I'm excited by this.
Yeah. Again, going back to invest into relationships, it's not transactional. Like, we like to put everything into this mathematical equation, but people want to be with other people. They're not transactional.
And I hope as well that it's not coming across down. This is difficult. I'm not saying this. You've got to go like read 4 books on this, and it's sort of complex. It's just that sort of sense of sometimes taking that step back and sort of putting yourself in their shoes as the candidate and thinking like, how easy was this? How excited would I be if I was the candidate? How much love am I feeling from you guys that you're excited to work with me beyond like, hey, we got a cool job. You obviously want it. Are you good enough for us? Right. And again, it's that sort of like that sort of trap you can sort of fall into there. So again, it's not no rocket science or no sort of extra books you have to read, I think, to make some small changes to really lift up the process.
Yeah, back in the days, just like Airbnb used to, I don't know if they do it now, but I remember reading their strategy. They were always like encouraging the people who would put their apartments into Airbnb to kind of consider it from the perspective of the visitor, and adding those small tiny elements, and they would have this like range of like what makes it more and more awesome. And that's the way you put it. Like, put yourself into their position, keep on improving on the process, and think about what would be great, even if it's like a gift basket at the hotel or something like that. Those tiny things, but when you get there, you're like, oh, this is pretty great. They really care.
Yeah, and also we're talking about brand here and employer brand, right? You're thinking about, okay, what advice can I give you to go and get the best talent? Again, it isn't just about this search. So even the candidate who didn't get the job, and go back to that network, right? Somebody else might go, I'm going to interview with X. What do you think about them? And if that candidate didn't get a job, had a reasonable experience, they're going to say, yeah, it was okay, but it was a bit chaotic, the process, and like I didn't quite understand why I didn't get the job. And that stuff will come out. And again, that might impact you in a way you never know about, because you might not even know that conversation happened. And somebody drops out and says, oh, I'm sorry, like I'm just not looking for a role right now. And you're like, oh, well, that's a shame. But you just don't know actually what has gone on behind it. So, just as you treat people in the right way and they go and say nice things about you, but as your company as well, that can be a great, and you can have a candidate you hire who was average about the experience, and you can have a candidate you didn't hire who would go away and say nice things about you, right? So it's not just about the success of the outcome. Yeah. It's really worth thinking about that it can impact your brand longer term.
That's true. I never took the role with Wooga. That was in 2013, and I still think positively.
Here you are. Right? But again, what's the return on that? Like 11 years later, they're getting a shout out that's going out to thousands of people saying like, they're great, they're great, and that's going to feel good. And that is a perfect example of the publicity you can get, right, without even realizing it, and the length of that return.
Shout out to Wooga. Yeah. Well, talking about like regarding Wooga, though, I mentioned the relocation part. You work with companies in LA, in Riyadh, in Barcelona, probably Singapore, probably Shenzhen, like you name it. What are some of the unique challenges or benefits in relocating gaming executives or app executive internationally?
So in terms of the benefits of that, or the challenges of hiring?
Both. Like look, however you want it. Like let's start tackling it on whatever side you want to go first. What is the challenge, or what are the other benefits?
So to take something more granular, so for example, in mobile gaming, right? I know obviously you've got a big audience in mobile gaming.
Yeah.
The talent pool is not equal across North America and Europe. There's different genres that have had more success in different areas, and there's a higher density of talent. So for match 3, Europe has some really great, Europe and obviously Turkey as well has some really fantastic match 3 talent. There are fewer big successes in match 3 to have come out of North America. Mid-core gaming, you've got more in North America, I'd say, in terms of the talent pool there. And that's partly because I think there's more of that sort of AAA. It's a little bit more, I think it's a bit more prestigious to a certain degree. And I'd be curious if anyone sort of comes in on that. But I've heard that from a CEO in the US recently. He said, I think that people feel that like the casual end is, if you're in LA or in San Francisco, it can be historically seen as like less prestigious in terms of the casual end than in Europe, where I think we've embraced it a little bit more with Helsinki and Stockholm and all these great successes that have come out. So having a think about where is the density of talent pool that we're going for. If you're looking for data and analytics, Israel has phenomenal talent, right? And again, if you can go more into social casino there, even if you're in casual, right? So you've got the side players and all the rest out of there, and Moon Actives and all the rest. So having an awareness for the specific role you are hiring for and the talent density is good, right? And that will help you. And again, a headhunter should know this. They should be able to say like, okay, like here's where you want to go. These are the kind of companies you want to go for. And then you get more granular below that, because actually some companies in recent years, they haven't had the culture hasn't been good, or the games haven't been successful, or whatever it is. You'd sort of say, well, I don't think that's going to be, again, you always find a superstar at any company, but again, you're trying to advise them around, okay, well, where's the advantage of opening up the search, and what you should be thinking about, right? And where's the hierarchy of things for you. So that's around some of the benefits of going international. I think particularly within games, if you go into broader consumer tech, like a lot of the product talent that people want in Europe, say, is in North America, right? Like a lot of people are like, hey, can we get the guy out of San Francisco did Uber or whatever?
No,
right?
you can't afford the guy from San
exactly.
Francisco. It's like give me 4x the salary.
Yeah, exactly. But
relax.
So that's some of the But I think actually one of the wonderful things being in the world of games is actually it's a really diversified talent pool compared to a lot of other sectors, which are very sort of concentrated around more specific cities in a much narrower field. And again, I think it's wonderful. You can go to Barcelona, you can go to Berlin, you can go to, I think France is that scene's growing and growing there. London, obviously, Stockholm, Helsinki, Istanbul, right? You've got all these wonderful talent centers for different areas of games. Again, Poland's growing particularly for PC console. There's a lot there that you can go and look at. So that's one of the advantages. Again, if you want to get a little bit more granular, you could start thinking about leadership qualities as well, of like what's going to fit with your team and the cultural capacity or aspect of that. And they are real, right? Like the companies operating in Finland are often very different from a company operating in London or Barcelona or Poland, right? And you've got to think about, and again, exactly, to the US even more so, right? And you don't want to make too many generalizations, but there are some fundamental things there around, okay, well, how do they communicate? Are they more collaborative, more top down, more analytics driven, like numbers data driven, more sort of field driven? There's different nuances there, both around management philosophy and game making philosophy. So that's one thing is to think about is the benefits of looking. The other side of that is, obviously, there's a question about relocation, right? Are you going to relocate someone? Practically, that's going to make things more expensive, as we've just talked about, right? You've got to put in a relocation package. You've got to think about, really, like, again, maybe salary differentials if you're trying to hire somebody from a higher cost geography to a lower cost one there. So there's a number of just practical challenges to think about that. If you're not going to relocate, to think very deeply about time zone differences if you're going to offer a remote role. And I think one trend I would see over the last couple of years, Mishka, would be at the start of searches, people being quite open to more remote roles at the start of a search. And then when they get to the decision-making point, they then start going, oh, actually 5 hours, or, from the US to Europe, or either way, actually day to day, that's kind of like, oh, but we've got our call at 6 p.m. or 4 p.m. right every day, and that's whatever
and then
time.
you have your kids and everything.
So I would, again, if I can offer some advice to anyone listening to this who's thinking about remote versus, I would say have a really deep think about how the time zones will work before you say, oh yeah, a transatlantic time zone difference is okay, because I think people see it up front and say, yep, that's okay, but when they actually get to the decision making point, they start to worry about how that dynamics is going to really operate in practice. It can do, but it does take a toll.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's definitely, you're in that honeymoon stage. You feel like everything is possible, and when the real life comes, it's like with the commutes. You might think that an hour and some is not that bad, and then once you add that every day, more and more, and then that might be actually the reason why you decide to leave the job, because the commute becomes too daunting. Even though in the beginning you thought that it's not that bad.
Yeah.
There's podcasts you can listen to, etc.
Yeah, no, and same for weekly commutes or hybrid commute. I'll do 3 days a week in Berlin and 2 days in my home in London or Barcelona, wherever it is.
It's kind of fun to fly over to Barcelona for a few days and
do
then
that
come
for
back.
2-3 years. It adds up. And again, actually, just from the candidate side, a lot of candidates we see are happy in their roles. They say, but you know what? The time zone difference, the teams everywhere, they're like, it's wearing after a while. So sort of attritionally, it will sort of increase the likelihood that person will churn after 2 or 3 years if there's no sort of change in that setup.
Yeah. And then the other challenge is, of course, the spouses when you talk about relocation. I remember this even back from the business school. Like, this was the number one reason why an expat stint doesn't work out, is the spouses. It's not the skill set, it's not the culture, it's not any of that. It's just at home, you come back home from work and somebody hates being there every single day and wants to get out, and at that point you basically just end up leaving because you can't take it.
Yeah.
So totally normal.
Yeah, and it's much more, and again, it's an obvious point, but it's much more of an international marketplace for candidates right nowadays as well. They don't like it, right? It's much more easier for them to hop across and change to a place they want to live.
Let me ask you a question, by the way, regarding that. Do you see that there are executive candidates who are working on site or hybrid, which is the worst form of them all? We can talk about that in the other instances. But they're working on site and they've been offered an executive, and they don't like it or they don't want to do it, and they've been offered an executive position that is fully remote. Is that compelling to them or not? Like, have you seen that being a factor?
Not so much that way around. No, okay. I would, in terms of people who are working on site being tempted by a more fully remote role.
That's the remote people's kind of like selling argument.
It
like,
would be
for everyone.
It would be if they've got a poor commute. Exactly. So if they are, it's 2 hours into LA through the traffic type thing, or or again, it's those scenarios you just mentioned where like they agreed to like 3 days a week in Barcelona and they live in London or Helsinki or whatever, then yes, that would be, they would prefer to go fully remote. So actually, to your point, the hybrid sort of model, either hybrid or if they've got a very bad commute, or again, if there's no one else around, then those are demoralizing factors that make them more likely to look at fully remote. But no, I think if people have got a good, again, there's sort of no magic here, right? Like if they've got a good in-person working culture, they're probably going to say, no, that's not attractive to go leave that. Family situation can be different. If they've got, again, family members, like a spouse who's doing a job where they would prefer to be based somewhere else. I remember a very cool candidate saying to me, like, their spouse was a supermodel. They're like, oh, they can only work in these fashion centers.
Wow.
And it was such a like, oh yeah, of course, I think they're sort of, again, they were just sort of like, again, people, they worked in the high end fashion, something. They're just like super cool anyway. And they're like, there's only like 2 cities that person the scene is big enough.
Awesome executives.
But it just, it could be as nuanced as anything. Again, somebody I remember once said that it was so specific. Their spouse had trained to be a tour guide on London buses. And this was their big trip. They loved doing it. And they relocated to somewhere else. But the promise this person made to their spouse was, we'll go back at some point to London, so you can
You'll get on double decker. Don't
you can
worry.
do that. So but again, it just shows the breadth of everything. I thought that was such a cool thing, right? And I thought it was lovely that they'd obviously had that relationship where, like, okay, we'll do this for a few years, and then you come back for my dream, right? And I think that's really, like, lovely. But again, it's like as everything we've seen in this world is influencing a factor, and that's not a generalization you can now make from these one data points. But it's there's sometimes it's not magic, right? But the reality is, if you've got a great in-working culture and the commute's not great, then somebody's is good. Sorry, they're going to probably like to stay and want to stay there. If some of those factors aren't out of whack, then they're going to be more tempted to pick up the phone to something like myself and say, oh, what else is out there, or like, oh, fully remote, that could work because, again, my childcare or whatever is
got it. So basically, as you said, you're in a human business, and if the conditions change drastically from what they were before, let's say somebody has been working like a couple of days, or in a hybrid setup, and the company is changing that more and more and more towards, like, you know what, we just watched, we're fans of Musk, and we decided that everybody's going to be on site. There's no negotiation. Then in that situation, you could understand that somebody would be looking to change jobs, because essentially their day-to-day life has significantly changed with this hypothetical ruling.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think it's going to be different from different people, and some people. I mean, it's sort of a broader point, which I think has been a consistent theme of this conversation, right? Is the nuance to flex to the person who's in front of you, right? And that goes from, if you're a hiring manager thinking about, okay, what are the drivers of this candidate, right? What do they really care about? Do they care about the culture? Do they care about the tech they're going to work on, the kind of game, the genre, the type of team they have, like the support they get from X or Y function? Right? There's not a general rule where you can say, well, this is going to work for everyone, right? And that ability to flex is really important as a hiring manager. And equally, we're talking about that, like, how do we get to the C level? Like, the more mature you get in your career, the more you're able to flex and get into the mind of the person in front of you to say, like, okay, what are they, how are they seeing the world? How do I solve this problem for them in a way they're going to be excited by versus defensive?
Yeah.
Right. And again, that is so individual there, but I think it's a really difficult. I think that, I said some of these other skills are easy. That, I think, is the most difficult skill for anyone, whether in politics, business, teaching, whatever it is, that ability to get into the mindset of someone else and have empathy for it and really inhabit that space and be able to flex across many, many different styles, I think gets you to the top of any profession you're in. There.
All right. Last question. I know you need to go. I want to ask about AI. So everybody's talking about AI, top companies, top salaries, everything AI related. Have you seen this AI surge in the headhunting? Are there, companies looking for chief language model officer, chief AI officer?
Yeah.
Is that something, like we saw Netflix appoint Mike Verdu now to lead their AI charge? That's a big company. That's a trendsetter in many ways. Is this being seen outside of it as well?
Yes. So I got asked by a CEO of a European, extremely well-known mobile games developer, hugely successful, and they said, like, we're looking for this kind of deep AI specialist type profile. I also got asked by a former senior executive from Duolingo, which is a very sort of gamified consumer app, who's got a 2-person startup who's looking for a co-founder for the same profile, right? So we're talking about the same profile being sought by a company of 2 people, as opposed to a company of hundreds of people with billions of dollars of revenue. So the answer is yes, people are looking for these types of individuals. It's not necessarily homogenous about the titling of this role yet, so it's not necessarily all the same type of title. People have still been quite quiet about it. I think there's still this slight stigma, or it's either because they don't want to tip off the competition to what they're doing, or it's because they're also internally concerned about people worried about, are we going to lose our jobs, right? Is AI going to come in and take over our jobs? But there is, without a doubt, that like the importance of bringing AI to refine certain functions in your processes, and you everyone is aware about this. Everyone is talking about this. Most people have and at an executive level, most executives have a very poor understanding still of really what is data science, really what is AI, what is it, what's an LLM versus, the special model, all these different types of models out there. So, I think the reality is, yes, people are looking for this, and it's not necessarily as public about it, but they definitely are. So if they're not loudly looking about it, you can guarantee they're looking for it quietly. And again, the Mike Verdu, that hasn't come out of a vacuum, right? That would have been sometime in the planning and in the thinking, right? So again, you might not see it, but it's definitely going on.
Got it. So if there's one element for branding, or when you're talking to headhunters, it's if you're interested in AI, spend time, learn about it, talk to your friendly headhunter in your biannual sync, and let them know that you've been investing time and learning about
With
this.
one caveat, actually, it's a good one, is people are suspicious of execs who just want to come and play with shiny toys. That is a consistent theme. So again, they want somebody who's really interested in AI and going to add value. But if somebody comes across as like, I'm just about AI, and like your company is a vehicle for me to indulge in my own interest about AI, people get a bit suspicious of that. So again, I think it's that, as I said, like an authentic, like how does this affect the business, and like, how does it impact things? I think is a really smart way.
Get a course that, there's top universities offering remote courses, from Harvard to Stanford to MIT are offering courses on AI. You can get through it. And then again, if you have that strategic perspective on the business, then you can marry what you've learned with that strategic perspective, and then have a very constructive conversation, rather than like, as you said, shiny new toy. I want to give it a go. Give me a big budget and a big salary, and I'll come in and play. Like, I understand that. Well, Gerard, always a pleasure. We had way more questions. We didn't even get into the hiring manager questions. So that means we need to get you back on the podcast. So thank you again for coming in and sharing so many insights into the executive hiring world.
Not at all, Michail. Real pleasure. And thank you for, again, anyone listening. I do appreciate the comments that come in and follow-up questions. So happy to help if I can on those. And I hope that this, and do give us some feedback on the is this helpful to people? I'm really keen to hear that as well. So I hope this has been useful for everyone listening.
Link in the description to Mission One and to Gerard's LinkedIn profile, which he may or may not reply because he's so busy. But thank you, everybody, for listening.
You did it. You made it to the end of the episode. As a fan of the show, it would help us out if you'd subscribe and leave us a review on the podcast service of your choice. Those stars and likes, while a small action on your part, mean a lot to us and help to grow the show. More importantly, are you a member of the Deconstructor of Fun Slack group? If you have 5 years or more of games industry experience, go to deconstructoroffun.com/Slack and apply to join. Join the games industry best professional community filled with peers always willing to lend a hand, or subscribe to our newsletter to get all the latest insights from the Deconstructor of Fun content creators. Thanks for listening.